costumes are very cool. Like everybody just looked up. Okay, everybody, I think we're gonna get started here. A few more stragglers coming in.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming. SLR, it's our second of 3 meetings.
Yeah, the costumes are very cool. Like everybody just looked up. Okay, everybody, I think we're gonna get started here. A few more stragglers coming in.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming. SLR, it's our second of 3 meetings, and we'll get going. Thank you.
Yeah, so we are here from SLR Consulting. We're based down in New Paltz, and we're doing a local flood analysis of Pine Hill. This is our second of 3 public meetings. We had, we'll go over some of the stuff.
Alden.
Yeah, so the Elton Creek is also part of the study area.
Okay.
We have Alton
I
and
just
Birch.
didn't see it, that's why.
Yeah, this is just an example.
Yeah, just kind of show like the general
Thank you.
features of each stream in the watershed. So this is it's a little even harder to see on this one, but it's a longitudinal profile with a kind of overdue plan form map, so you can kind of see where the profile starts and ends. So down in the lower right, it starts at the Shandaken Reservoir, and then the LFA study area is kind of like the red pointer at the top. And that's where Birch Creek is on the profile. I know it's like kind of hard to see.
Well, could you point it out?
Yeah.
Can you make that bigger?
That's a good question. Probably.
Okay.
We'll start with this. This is just like the slope with longitudinal profile.
Yeah, so this is down at the Shandaken Reservoir where the Sopus Creek empties into the Shandaken Reservoir, and all the way at the top on the left side is the headwaters of the Sopus Creek, and then the green line is Birch Creek, and where it confluences with the Sopus Creek. So Sopus Creek is a lot steeper at the top, and kind of shallows down as it heads towards the Shandaken Reservoir. And if you compare Sopus Creek, which is the blue line, with Birch Creek, you can see that Birch Creek is a lot steeper than a Sopus Creek.
Yeah. And because it's steeper, that's why you have more erosion than further downstream. And then this is just in context of the geography, so instead of just a line on a graph, you can see kind of transitionally.
And this is just kind of summarizing Birch Creek as a headwater and kind of transfer zone stream. So in these headwaters and transfer zones, they're in more mountainous areas, so you see steeper slopes, and they're more confined because the valley is kind of tighter on the stream. There's less room for the stream to meander and move. And in those places, you see higher velocities, coarser sediment sizes in the streams, which, the higher velocities lead to bank failures or channel deepening. So there's a lot more sediment transportation happening rather than deposition. So the water's fast enough that the sediment is being carried along rather than the water being slow enough that the sediment is settling. So then you'll see higher rates of bank erosion rather than deposition. Any questions on that? And we also just wanted to quickly touch on active channels and floodplains, because that's something that we obviously deal with a lot within our studies. So in the first picture, which we got from the MOSCAD manual by Tim Koch, shows a stream with the active channel width laid out in yellow and the wet width in the blue line. An active channel width is the channel that conveys the normal high flow events that do not overtop the bank. So it's kind of like what you see most frequently during the year. And any flow bigger than that will overtop the banks and flow onto the floodplain, which in the second diagram, it says bankful width, but which is a similar term to active channel, but active channel is what we're going to be using within our study. But the floodplain is the land outside of the active channel width. So in higher flood events, the floodplain will be flooded, and the floodplain is important because it can provide some temporary storage space for the floodwaters. It slows down the water because it settles, and that also helps reduce stream bank erosion too. We are looking at floodplains as a potential solution to some flooding problems that we see in Pine Hill, which we can't do that everywhere, but in places that we can, we are looking into the opportunity. Yes.
You might speak a little bit louder. There's some people here that can't hear well.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I can go over the slide again really quickly.
And it's okay not to go quick. Well, we're all really interested in this, so
Okay.
really, it's fine.
Okay. All right, so this is just about active channel width and floodplains and how we're utilizing them within our study. The first photo kind of shows a stream with the active channel width superimposed with the yellow line and the whited width. And the active channel width is the channel that conveys normal high flow events that do not overtop the banks. So that's kind of a flow you'll see normally throughout the year, and any flow that is bigger than that will spill onto the floodplain, which is why floodplains are important, because they can provide some temporary storage space for the floodwaters. You know, instead of flooding the road or a building, it'll be held in the floodplain. Because the water slows down, and it provides some space for the floodwaters, and it also helps reduce stream bank erosion, which is important. So this is floodplains, constructed floodplains are something that we are going to look at for potential solutions to the flooding that we see in Pine Hill.
What are your solutions?
We are going to
Great
do
question.
that. Yeah, that's the next one.
Thank you. That's a perfect transition. So this is our toolkit. This is our toolbox of what we can do across different projects. So for different projects, we use different tools from this list depending on the situation. So in Pine Hill, we're really looking at the bridges and culverts, making sure that they are adequately sized. We're looking also at channels. You have some really confined channels in town. And then also looking at floodplains. Those are kind of our main three that we're looking at here. And so first with our culverts, with the help of Safari, we came up with a stream crossing prioritization. So here you have the red boundary is the boundary area of our study, and we've got even a few that are outside of the boundary that were suggested. And we've marked a few of the crossings as high priority. That's if they're structurally a high priority. We have the orange ones, which means that they have a large impact on flooding. Yellow is they have an impact, but smaller impact on flooding. And then the green ones are adequately sized to at least pass a 50-year flood. And then I also have this in a list. So these are the different crossings in town, and they are not ranked within each group, but each group is kind of ranked together. And these are just broad prioritization of which structures to replace based off of flooding or structurally. And again, with the study, we are doing recommendations. We're not saying this needs to be replaced right now. A lot of what we do in our other studies is to give some recommendations so that when it's time to replace one of these bridges or when there's funding available, you can turn to our study and say, hey, this is maybe next on the list. So our next kind of tool in the toolbox is looking at channels. There's these 5 sections through town where we see, this is our depth grid, our flood depth grid map with the different colors. The different colors show different flood levels.
Can you zoom in on that a little bit so they can see what the colors mean?
Yeah, so the colors are just increasing in depth. The specific number is less important than deeper versus shallower water. And these sections have tight channels. So through channel adjustments, we can reduce the amount of flooding. And how that works kind of in our model is the pink line is the this is one of the cross sections that we have on Birch Creek. And so the pink line is the current elevation, the current terrain. If we then widen the channel to that, like an appropriately sized active channel width, and lower the floodplain, we create some space for the water, and therefore we can lower down the flood level. So you see the 10-year flood level reduces about 2 feet, and so does the 50-year flood level. So what that means for the building over there is a reduction in about 2 feet of flooding in these events, just by making that channel a little bit wider for the active channel width, and lowering that floodplain as well. So that's just an example of what it means to do some of these proposed changes.
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Yes,
So if you widen the channels, you're going to be taking away our property, correct?
correct. Again, this is proposed changes. We are not doing something, we're not saying like this property at this location needs to be changed. But yes, it does mean that we are controlling, saying some widening of the channel in this location is going to reduce flooding.
So you're kind of invoking eminent domain then?
We are
No,
not.
no,
No.
No. This is just a study.
I know, but you wouldn't do a study if it wasn't going to lead to something.
Now, if you wanted to stop your house from flooding and it happens to fall in one of these areas, this is the option you have to stop your house from flooding. That's what this
This
study
isn't
is.
It's all
something we're
volunteer.
doing. We're not coming in and saying, we're gonna make this wider and we're taking away your land.
This is an option for you.
It's- Yeah.
The only reason why I'm saying that is that they've already done that. I'm on Elm Street, and they already took 2.5 feet from us a year or two ago, when they came and replaced the pipe. And they said, don't worry about it, we're gonna fix this. They widened it so much that there's not a lot of water there. And they said, well, we're gonna go ahead and replace it on the bank, so your bank doesn't erode, with plants, shrubs, bushes, fruit trees, things like that. And all they did was block the view from us seeing the creek. And now the creek water is so wide that there's hardly any water. Meanwhile, they did take some of our property.
Who did this?
Who did this? If you want, give me a few minutes, I'll pull up the videos, because I have the videos of them doing that.
It's gonna be the DEP.
DEP? Oh, when they changed the pipes? All right, when they did a sewer line, okay. So it wasn't there.
Yes.
Maybe this isn't another slide, so tell me if I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah.
Is one alternative to deepen the channel as opposed to widening the channel?
No. We generally don't recommend that. As Kai was saying with the slope, deepening the channel, you're gonna basically slow the water down in that spot, which means you're just gonna get that water you're gonna get that sediment right back, or you have to continue deepening it all the way down, and at some point, like, you're just kind of pushing the problem further downstream. So generally, deepening is not a long-term solution.
Plus it increases the velocity.
Yeah.
And chances are it goes.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to say that any of the recommendations that are followed up with eventually, or proposed to be followed up with, would take a landowner participation as a like you would volunteer to participate, because the idea is to also assist you in reducing your flood risk. And so it would be, something that would be brought to you, and you wouldn't, no eminent domain, nobody would be taking anything. So it would just be something that the town and the engineers would want to work with you to, if you're a targeted landowner, and by your own participation.
And it opens us up for funding too, because it's recommended in the study that there's a problem area. It opens up the funding for it to do the job too.
And that's a good point. Kind of maybe back up of the point of the study is, and like the long term. So we are conducting the study. It'll then go to the town for approval, and once it's been approved, then it, like you're saying, it opens up for opportunities for funding for these kinds of projects.
Even individual landowners are open for funding if you wanted to. Once you're in an LFA area and shown as, mapped in an LFA area, you are then eligible potentially for funding to do property protection measures, wet floodproofing, things like that, become eligible. So this is really to benefit the entire community.
What happens if the landowner participation is spotty? It seems as though you could have one part of an area that would be completed, and then an obstacle, and then another part completed. How do you get cohesiveness in the plan?
Challenge and struggle. I think that's where we say we did our study, and that's then kind of like the next steps after this. Like, so we are doing the study, and then we hand it off to the town. So we're not doing like the design, we're not doing the follow-up. That can come later, and sometimes that does come back to SLR, but that's longer term, and that's a whole nother discussion.
This predominantly opens the town up for some grants for larger bridges, larger culverts, getting the water not to be at a pinch point in those two small bridges or culverts. Doesn't, so it won't back up. Okay.
I just want to add to this man's question about the deepening the channel. And so that is an alternative that can be looked at should the town so choose to say, look at deepening the channel here, 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 to see if there is a benefit to doing that given the cost of what it would cost to do that. And in previous local flood analyses in Phoenicia and Mount Tremper and Shandaken and Alabin, that was looked at and was done, and it was determined to not have a positive cost to benefit ratio, so it's not effective enough given the cost that it does to do that. And so I think that's been consistent through a lot of the flood analyses that have been done, but it's certainly something you could do.
Yeah, it's not that it's just generally not something that we've seen that is an effective solution.
And if you don't deepen the entire channel, you only deepen one spot, because say one property owner doesn't want to give any of their land to the project, then that one deep spot is just going to get filled in with sediment from the other.
Yeah, you create kind of like a pool.
Right?
Yeah.
And especially in a steep stream like this, you start cutting the channel deep, you send head cuts up the side channels. And then you start unraveling all the side channels too, so it's really probably never going to happen up here, just because it'll cause more problems down the road.
What's the role of the DEP in terms of their contribution to projects? Because this all benefits the DEP if we're reducing sediment.
They're fun.
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, so next up is
Aaron Bennett with New York City DEP. And the benefit is, I don't know how far back to go. After Tropical Storm Irene, the communities got together and advocated very strongly for the different entities that regulate the DEP and said, stop buying so much land on the tops of the mountains, put it into solving flooding issues in our community. And so and so that's how we got to one of these tools, the local flood analysis, where we are now, and that it does benefit water quality. In a lot of cases, the purpose of these LFAs aren't for sediment transport in a lot of ways, because the turbidity isn't really tied to this. It's more of a water quality in terms of keeping man-made pollution, fuel tanks, homes, garage, stuff that's in highway garages or garage paint cans and things, debris like that out of the reservoir and pollution of that nature. So it's to reduce water surface elevation, floodwater levels at structures, right? To protect our communities, keep people in communities, and protect water quality. And so that's why it benefits the city of New York, is that keeping man-made pollution out of the creeks. And certainly there is a sediment transport component to this, but it's not so much like the big failing stream banks that you see, the projects that are being done. That's under a different pot of money. But this is for flood analysis. This is for reducing water surface elevations in population centers. And it's because
That would also reduce sedimentation. And I don't understand why there's no equal emphasis on that, as it benefits the water quality for New York City.
there is an equal emphasis. It's funded primarily by the city through a different program, for a different pot of money. Here, it's really for, like I said, keeping, the water quality benefits of keeping pollutants out of streams. There is a program for sediment management and things like that. Here, it's more of, clearly they're connected, because as you said, the erosional zone at deposits, like in Phoenicia, where it's a depositional zone, there's sediment transport there. And so it is linked to flood analyses and his question about, deepening channels. But that's not the main, the local flood analysis study and the funding that will become available to the town and private property owners for this program is not going to be to repair a stream bank that's full of clay. That's through a different program. It's to,
Do they talk to each other?
well, the Ashokian Watershed Stream Management Program, which Kaya and Mika started off with, right, that umbrella has both of these programs under their umbrella. And so, the work that's been going on, like up in the Stony Clove and in other areas for years, is the same entity, just, like I said, a different pot of money.
They're doing a project in Pantakill, I think starting next week.
And the buffer plantings and things like that. That this Catskill Stream Buffer Initiative also has that focus of, not letting stream banks erode. But again, it's different than what we're talking about tonight. They're connected, but it's not it's not a direct link. Sorry, probably further confusing.
So here's our kind of our initial map of proposed changes. So we have the
Make it larger, yes.
yeah. So we have like the green lines are for creating floodplain. Yellow is section to raise the road. We've got purple is resizing culvert, resizing crossing. That's from that initial list of the prioritization. And then blue is to widen that active channel. So again, this is just proposed projects. We're not forcing anything. And you give a combination of different tools in different locations for different sites. And so we've got kind of through town.
So again, I understand that these are just ideas, very conceptual ideas that in the modeling show that reducing flood levels at structures or at bridges, things like that. So it's similar in the modeling, you take bridges completely out of the model, right? Even though you're never going to take a bridge out and not have it anymore to cross. It's just an exercise to figure out what's the most bang for the buck.
Yeah.
And then once you know that, then politics come involved, costs come involved, benefit, all these feasibility, landowner participation, all this comes into play, and the town has to decide what's feasible, what's not.
Yeah. And so we can kind of show the effects. So this is the current 50-year, like 2% annual flood levels. And again, we've got depth grid. And then if we apply those changes, is this big enough? Kind of. We see a reduction. So we're looking for a reduction based off of those proposed projects. And we can move back to these, but we'll finish our chat first. And then, but based off those reductions, we then put that into a benefit cost analysis. Which do you want to cover?
Yeah. So we've mentioned this a couple times, but benefit cost analysis is basically something that kind of determines the future risk reduction benefits of a project that we might implement and compares it to the costs of the project. So the result of that is the BCR, which is a benefit cost ratio. And the benefits are the avoided damages. And so in order to get funding from FEMA, the BCR has to be 1 or greater, and that's considered cost effective. But there are also other programs and funding resources that you can use that will provide funding even if the BCR is less than 1.
And how they calculate those, like the benefits, it's reduced risk, like avoided damages, and they have ratios for X number of feet for of a first floor elevation for a home. Like, there's whole charts for that, and we can get into more of that maybe some other time. But so we take those projects, we go into the VCA, and then from that is you get the projects. And so kind of looking ahead more practically for the LFA, we've already met with Safari a few times. This is our second public meeting. We're meeting again with Safari next week. And then we'll be back here in the fall with our final results of the study. And then from there, the town can adopt our study or accept it. And then from there, you can apply it for funding for different projects. And that's kind of the future of this study. So that's for what you had prepared. If you have other questions, we can move back to those plots if there's anything
When the
else.
study is done, is there a possibility that it can be put online so that we can see it before the next meeting? Maybe through
I
the town
think so.
website? That would be very
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, make it publicly available.
Can we have these slides?
Yeah. And then we'll talk, I don't know how to best do that, but
I can take anyone's email.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Do you want something specific, we can
Yeah.
send that, or if there's,
On the flood page for the town of Shandaken, can you just post a series of PDFs?
Sure.
okay,
Okay.
we'll do that then, and then it's available.
Do you today, do you have maps like you had last time so we could see because obviously,
Yeah.
we know this is just the beginning of a process, so this isn't, but it's, the greatest curiosity is, here's my house, I want to see what's going on around it.
Yeah, so I'm gonna just make that one, take those images and make them bigger. We didn't bring the big maps today to write all over. But I think it's just probably save this image and make it big.
Zoom in.
Yeah.
So red is deepest on those, is that right?
The blue is
the
the
blue,
deepest.
blue and purple. Let's see if I can.
And you're showing us that
Yeah.
before or after?
This is before, so this is current, and then I can do the same for the proposed amendment. But any other questions before?
Could you explain the difference between the floodplain proposed solution versus the channel widening proposed solution? In my head, they're the same.
Yeah, so it's kind of a combination of two, and it depends on the location. So in some cases, if there are structures on either side, we can't really build a floodplain, so we might just look more at the channel. So there's that active channel width, that each stream is kind of like the width that a stream wants to be for its kind of yearly flow. And if we constrict that, then you increase velocities, and then you get more erosion. So by widening it to that active channel width, you kind of reduce the pressure on the walls in some senses. But then adding a floodplain also gives the water somewhere to go in high water. So if there's a big flood that comes through every 5-10 years, however often, that's when the floodplain really comes in handy. So it's really to kind of keep the water out of the roads, out of buildings. If we give the water somewhere to go in a floodplain, then we can protect the other structures and keep that water level low. It also slows down the water, so then you also have less damage and less erosion. So the floodplain is for in flood events, and the channel is for more of your regular. Yeah, regular. Did I answer your question?
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, so one of the proposals is going to be expanding the floodplain.
Mm-hmm.
By doing that, do you have any visibility on how that would affect, say, homeowners and their flood insurance policies that are already in a floodplain or might come out of a floodplain or might have never been in one but now they are? That kind of, is that part of the benefit cost that we're looking at here?
Yeah, so that goes into it. I think some of this also, and Heidi might know this better, comes later. So after a project is done, so we have our LFA, we propose a project, the town comes together, says we're going to do this project, or the homeowners say we're going to do this project. From that, then you can go to FEMA and say, hey, due to this project, our flood level elevations have changed. you need to adjust the flood insurance as well. And then you can put in a request
You
and
have to do a little more.
you have to do a lower.
You have to do a little more to get that. So what we're saying, what I'm telling Mika here is, once a major area has been reconfigured, let's say, and let's say we do see a reduction in flood levels, then the town can conduct with the engineer consultant a LOMR, a letter of map revision, and go through the process of remodeling it, studying it, and submit it to FEMA. If FEMA approves the LOMR, that will now be the new base flood elevation, perhaps in your area, and then that's when your insurance will get adjusted, because then your insurance will see the new maps, see that it's been verified, adopted, et cetera, and then your insurance could change. That's a long process, but ultimately, that could be the path that this goes on.
Peter, you might know this better than me, but I don't know, but would that stand to, well, I mean, let's say that we alter the floodplains, but would that stand to change, say, building setbacks and whatnot that are already in place now? Say that if we can contain flooding differently, and there's like a property that's right now in a floodplain, we can't build on it, say that. Would that stand to change the city's approach to where you can build close to a
floodplain.
What's that?
You can build on a floodplain, you just have to build the current flood codes. You can't really, you can build in a floodway, but it's extremely difficult. So a floodway is probably more what you're thinking of.
Thank you for
Whereas
that.
the crosshatch.
Same question that
That's
way.
pretty much you can't build it, or you don't want to build it there. But in a floodplain, if there's a structure there, this would allow you to go to the DEP and get funding to elevate and, take your first floor elevation out of the 100-year flood, which reduces your flood insurance significantly. And in the letter of map revision, we're doing one now for Mount Tremper, because when we replaced the Route 28 bridge, it changed the whole topography there. So the engineers, SLR, is actually doing it, where that's going to get a letter of map revision there, and it's going to lower the elevations in that area on FEMA's current, adopted maps at that point.
That's the-
Whether it really helps them down there, because that's a huge floodplain down there, but it will lower the elevations a little bit. So here, compared to Phoenicia and Mount Tremper and Shandaken, there's only a few areas that really have problems here. So it's, it's limited to the lower part of town, like back in Birch Creek over here, and some up Bonneview. So other than that, it's really kind of limited. It's not that we don't want to go through and change the entire street. You're giving tools to these few people and these few bridges and stuff to be properly sized and, try to get these houses out of it. I'm not talking about knocking them down and moving them. The perfect example is the house right by the bridge down there. If we change the bridge and they do something with the house, maybe elevate it a little more, it'll help their flood insurance. The bridge will help lower the flood elevation there, because it's all going to be recommended in this study. So that helps us with funding too.
Yeah, it's not so much that the floodplain will diminish so you can, build closer to the stream, because likely to help, we might want to widen the floodplain, just so it flows without as much danger and damage. But mostly it's the culverts and the bridges that enlarging those will keep the water from backing up behind them and flooding the properties. And that should ultimately lower the flood elevation.
Not to hog the questions, but one more real quick. Is any consideration going to surface runoff from the town itself? Like from the hardscape in the town?
As far as now.
That's the stormwater we're working on. Yeah,
Different.
That's
project.
a different project, yeah.
Can I just, one thing that you said was, and Eric touched on it, was, what a lot of these local flood analyses that have been done are, and this is like the 24th one in 39 different communities, they're not really, these big floodplain projects where you're, and you're taking all these, 10, 20 structures out of the floodplain, so they don't have to pay flood insurance. There's one case of that in Walton, where a project was done, and about 20 homes, because of a number of different mitigation measures, they did a LOMR, and those structures are now outside the floodplain. You don't have to pay flood insurance. More of what it is are those, like what Eric was saying, the elevations, right? So, you know, if you have a home there, you can apply for funding through the Catskill Watershed Corporation once property protection measures are recommended in this flood analysis as an option for residents. You can apply for a feasibility study to see how high you need to lift your house or floodproof it. Then you can apply for funding, for 75% of the funding to design it, have someone design what it would look like, and then again 75% of the cost to construct.
Wow.
So that's what's happening more and more, most commonly as a result of these individual property protection measures.
Great.
Okay, that's
Thank you.
probably what we're looking at more so here. And of course, the bridges and culverts is different, but that's probably what the solutions are going to be for.
Thank you for answering the question I meant to ask.
Yeah, because to Aaron's point, the Lomar is not in this particular, scenario, is probably not likely.
It's worth looking at, everything's worth
Right.
looking at, right?
Mhm.
Just based upon the number of structures and the proximity to the roads and the creeks, it's not, that's what we get back to the benefit cost of doing that, right? Is it realistic? So.
Can we talk a little bit about what happens with the bridges? You mentioned a number of bridges, and Eric's brought up the fact that we have bridges. We have many bridges in Shandaken, but we have a lot in Pine Hill, and a number of them are historic. And I think I'm seeing that some of those are on this.
You can replace a historic bridge.
Yeah, could you
It's
talk a
not-
little bit about that, about how that works?
Well, when you replace a historic bridge, when you get done, it looks like the original bridge. Most of them are concrete with stone facing on it, so it looks like a stone arch bridge. I mean, to build a stone arch bridge like Mill Street would be quite cost prohibitive then.
Yeah.
And it probably wouldn't be accepted by the state as an
Right.
acceptable
Right,
structure.
right.
But they did one in Saugerties after Irene, and they stone faced it so it looks like a historic bridge. I mean, Academy Street Bridge isn't in great shape. That's just the head poles that are left it out anyhow.
Right.
Elm Street, one side of it's missing. They put an extension on it. The only one that's really in pretty good shape is Mill Street. The rest of them are not very good.
So I'm gonna speak about Elm Street. You
Yeah.
said one side is there and one side isn't. The one that isn't, who's going to fix that?
That will be part of this.
But it happened 25 years ago.
Happened long before I was there.
Okay. So now who do we contact to see if they can fix that?
Well, that's more than just going in there and fixing it. It has to be design a new bridge to accommodate the stream and then deal with the big plunge pool that's on the lower side of it. So that's what this whole thing is about. It allows us to get funding to come up with a design for that bridge to replace it with an acceptable structure.
So what I asked the folks from SLR to put up again, and we looked at it, but these are the actual road stream crossings that they're studying, and right now at this stage is what they've seen as their prioritization group. Now, I know we kind of went through it quickly, but now that we're talking about the actual bridges, you can maybe go back and see where Mill Street or Academy Street is at this, and if you have any questions about that, it would be good opportunity to ask.
I mean, the two Bonneview bridges have to be replaced within the next year or so. They're both going to get replaced.
And one is a county bridge.
The third one up is the county bridge. That's the council.
That I just noticed it said county bridge, and I'm just curious where.
The third one up is the county bridge. I mean, we have this in a lot of places. One bridge is theirs, one bridge is ours on the same road.
That's not a bridge.
Which one is the third one?
It's towards the end of Bonneview.
Okay.
Right before you get to where the water plant and stuff is up there.
Yeah, yeah.
That last
Okay.
bridge, that's a county bridge.
Okay, interesting.
And the other two, the one on the corner of Station Road is ours, that weird twin thing.
Yeah.
That's probably going to get replaced with a single bridge, a little bit wider so it can accommodate both roads. And then the next one down with the plate on it, that one
Yeah.
has to get replaced.
Yeah.
And none of all of them, the abutments are bad, so if we're going to replace them and put new abutments, we're going to size them to the channel properly and put a proper sized bridge, which is, again, where this falls back in, where they give us recommendations of the size of the channel, the size of the bridge, the shape of the channel, just so we don't make the whole channel unstable up there too.
Right, so we need to be wider.
And they should all,
Yeah.
they're all.
Yeah. Got it.
And some of the walls in Pine Hill, they are historic. Is there a historical preservation society funding that will help?
Once it's, I'm deal with highway, I'm only within the highway right away.
I know we have lost a lot of those walls, though, just in the last couple of years. A lot of them have come down.
And that's again where they channelize the stream and it increases the velocity and causes a lot of the problems too. So there's no floodplain for the stream to get out and slow down. It's staying in a channel, and it's just like firing a bird nose at it.
Can we talk for just a minute about the bridge on, the first bridge on Main Street, where Main Street and Pine Hill Road and
The upper
and
ridge.
Bonnyview that come together? Is that, where
That's
is
on
the?
the list too. They're all, every crossing in town is on the list.
Which one are you asking about?
So the idea is that
Cathedral Brook.
that's a fairly new bridge. The superstructure on top
Yeah.
probably isn't the greatest, but the abutments are good. If we ever got to replace it and replace the abutments, then I know this study will come into the recommendation that it needs to be sized differently. That's,
Yeah.
you know, it may not be used today, tomorrow, it may be 10 years down the road, the next flood takes out the bridge. We have this to give us our recommendations. And it helps us too when we upsize a bridge and FEMA's paying for it. Well, here it was recommended it has to be built by New York State standards, and it's undersized. We did quite a few after Irene.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I got one. So there's no high priority flood bridge, just structural
Correct, as in terms of like
Flood-
what needs to be.
flood reduction.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
that's
they-
just kind of how we separated it out.
Yeah, I think you prioritize this to what I need to replace kind of right away. And what I
Yeah.
have on my list of what needs, I know it's going to need to be replaced pretty quick.
Yeah.
So that's how we came up with those 3 red ones up there. They are bridges that need to be replaced. Well, the county bridge is deficient, needs to be replaced, and our 2 bridges are deficient and need to be replaced immediately. So that's why they're red.
So they're
So they have to
replaced
be
for structural
Yeah,
reasons.
for structural.
Right. They might have flood.
There's also, yeah, there's,
Flood.
not to say that they're great flood-wise, but in terms of, yeah, order of events of replacing that, so.
You just want to talk a little bit about where you are in the process now, what's going to happen between now and the final meeting? Maybe you can explain.
Yeah.
I know you're doing the BCR and stuff, but kind of explain like the process that you guys are going to go through.
Yeah, so basically we have a whole bunch of models. We're putting like our final recommendations together, and then we take those recommendations, we kind of divide them up into projects, and then we do the BCRs for each of those projects. That all goes into a report. We write up a whole nice long report, and then that will be what we then come back to present in the fall. It's kind of like the next steps. And then from that report is where you guys can then take the reins and take action on some of those recommendations.
Is there a public meeting for additional comment prior to the town adopting the recommendation,
Yes,
Yeah.
aside from the fall meeting?
yes.
Question, you mentioned a number of funding, potential funding sources for things. In my particular case, there's the screen wall, the stone wall that's been there 100 whatever years, has washed out an immense amount of that wall in this last year. Should we have another storm as bad as happened last November, an even greater amount of that wall will disappear. I would like to figure out some way to try to lessen the potential impact of something like that. But I'm at a loss as to how to proceed, who to approach, or even how to correct what's gone.
Yeah, I think on the short term, I think AWSMP does a lot of that, or
Who?
CWC.
Wait, you speak
Sorry,
so quickly.
sorry, the AWSMP, the Shandaken watershed,
Stream management.
And then I think CWC does that. The
CWC?
no.
Do it. No, so all the partner, DEP's partners are the soil and water conservation districts, like the Ashokan, this is the Ashokan Watershed Stream Management Program.
Mhm.
They're on Route 28 in Ashokan, across from the mobile station. And so they work with streamside landowners for, stream bank stabilization, tree plantings, things like that. So I would think you might want to start with them.
Thank you.
Yeah, for something like that.
Thank
And I just, we got a letter about that SLR is doing measurements, elevation measurements for
Yes.
properties, and we didn't talk about that very much today.
Yeah.
Could you?
So that goes into the BCA, the benefit cost analysis. So yes, certain homeowners that are in the floodway or floodplain should have gotten a letter with an option to opt out from first floor elevations. We're gonna have a surveyor come up and just take a quick elevation of your first floor, so we can put that into the calculations for if we reduce the flood level for certain projects. What does that do in terms of protecting certain buildings based off first floor elevation? So if you'd like to opt out, I think all the information is on there.
I was curious, when will we find out?
I think that's happening. I don't think we're gonna get it by the end of the month, but we might.
Mark had told me the surveyor was going to go out early to mid-September.
Okay. Yeah, that
It'll be
sounds.
3 days worth of surveying. You're going to hit as many houses as they can as far as people, stay in, basically. And then any of that information gathered, you can follow up in the next, meeting and say, I'd like to know what my elevation was if you surveyed my property. I don't know that they're going to get to everybody.
But they are not
But
official elevation certificates.
They're,
They're
no,
just
I was
for
just
us-
going to say.
They're just reference for us to do this study.
But if you're curious, that information can definitely be made available.
What is the not official part?
In order to do an actual first floor elevation for your house, you have to hire a surveyor to give you an elevation certificate. These are basically just a survey for us to use in our study. They're not official elevation certificates.
Or a reference point.
They're reference.
Okay, thanks.
And, I was mentioning the bridges and the culverts, and even if your house isn't in the floodway or the floodplain, the bridges and culverts are important because you might want to leave your house during the flood.
We all see what happens with the lower bridge in town.
Yeah.
What lower bridge?
One thing I'll just point out, because there was some interest in knowing seeing studies and learning about some of the other areas. So on catskillstreams.org, that website, if you go to local flood analysis, it has all of the 20-some reports, which this one will be added to once it's completed, for everywhere, Delaware County, Greene County, one or two in Sullivan County, Schoharie County, all these different studies that have been done in population centers, so you can get a sense of what some of the solutions are. Now, I think we all know there's no magic bullet or potion that's going to solve flooding, so it's just figuring out ways to mitigate it that make sense and are palatable to communities and residents, and also protect water quality. So, yeah. But catskillstreams.org.
That's a great website, just to see all the various projects, not even just LFA projects, but stream management projects. If you're here of the general interest, I really recommend going to that site. There's a really great mapping tool. You can click on a site and see what's been done there. It shows you before and afters, and that can really paint a picture of the type of work that might ultimately come out of this.
Thank you all for coming. If you have other questions, want to look at things, let us know. We'll hang out for a bit. But yeah, great to see so many people interested.
The two of you, too. And this is not easy to get in front of people who have property and have concerns and know that things are changing and moving and a lot we don't have control over. So I really appreciate you sort of hanging in there with us.
We're trying to, we're trying to help you guys as much as we can, and that's, yeah, I think we're all on the same team.
Are you able to put one of those two maps,
Oh, yeah.
two maps up so that we can go up close and
Yes.
get a look?
I can get that.
Thank you.
This is the one. And then this is the other. So this is with the proposed changes.
So,
Would you like
can
me
we
to zoom
leave
in on-
it- Can you leave it up
Yeah.
so that we can?
Go ahead, if you want me to zoom in on a certain section,
And
let me
personal.
know. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
The end of the formal portion.
Yeah, we are in the floodplain, but luckily the water drains very efficiently across the front edge of our property. And the tides. No issues with that.
Are you looking at certain specific spots?
For other things with, other methods and stream channel, even if you can just get a little bit more of the width in the stream channel, that too, you don't want to do it too much because again, it has negative impacts, but that's why they're really evaluating and modeling all the systems.
It's like their earpieces. That's from my house.